Echoes of the Heart. In a small, bustling city where life never seemed to pause, there lived a man named Jack Turner. He was the kind of person you'd see walking down the street with a confident stride, always wearing his headphones, always lost in the world of music. Jack had a reputation in the neighborhood, a good one, at least in his mind. His music was his escape, the only place where his thoughts could roam free, unbound by the weight of expectations or the demands of life. But Jack's freedom came at a cost, one that he didn't realize until much later. Jack had moved into the apartment complex a few years ago, drawn by its affordable rent and the lively energy of the area. The building was old, the walls thin, but it had character. Every night, after a long day at his monotonous job, Jack would lock himself in his small apartment, turn up the volume, and let his favorite tunes flood the space. The thumping bass vibrated through the walls, the fast-paced rhythms ricocheted through the hallways, and the melody echoed from his window into the streets below. To him, it was blissful. He was free, and that was all that mattered. However, not everyone shared Jack's view of the world. His neighbors were a mix of personalities, each with their own quiet struggles, and the loud music that blasted through the apartment complex disturbed them in ways Jack had never considered. Among them was Mrs. Adler, a woman in her late 60s who had lived in the building for decades. She was frail, often hunched over her cane, and spent most of her days tending to her plants and keeping to herself. Mrs. Adler loved peace and quiet, and she had a deep respect for the stillness of the world around her. One particularly stormy night, as Jack's music reverberated through the entire building, a knock echoed at his door. It was unexpected, especially considering he had never had a single visitor in the past months. Jack paused the music, a frown tugging at his lips. He opened the door to find Mrs. Adler standing there, her face weathered but determined. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack leaned against the doorframe, an eyebrow raised. "What's up, Mrs. Adler? You don't like my playlist?" he asked with a smirk, not fully understanding the tension in her eyes. "It's not about the music itself," she replied slowly, her gaze steady. "It's about the way it makes others feel. Some of us need peace. Some of us can't sleep with the noise. I understand you love your music, but it's disrupting our lives." Jack was taken aback. He had never really thought about the impact his music had on anyone other than himself. To him, it was his private world, a place where he could escape from everything that weighed on him. But Mrs. Adler's words hit him in a way that he couldn't ignore. "I didn't realize. I'm sorry," Jack muttered, feeling a strange twinge in his chest. He wasn't used to apologizing. It felt foreign, uncomfortable, yet somehow it felt right. Mrs. Adler smiled gently, a softness in her tired eyes. "It's all right, Jack. We all need balance. I know you didn't mean to cause trouble." Over the next few days, Jack found himself thinking more and more about Mrs. Adler's words. He began to notice the other small things he had never paid attention to before, the quiet hum of the neighborhood, the calm of the early mornings, the way people spoke in hushed tones in the hallways. He realized that his music, which once felt like his personal haven, had been intruding on the peace that others sought. He'd been so absorbed in his own world that he had neglected the people around him, the very people who shared the same space. But Jack wasn't the type to just sit back and feel guilty. He made a decision, one that seemed small but carried weight. He would turn the music down, not just for Mrs. Adler, but for everyone who lived in the building. He would find a way to balance his love for music with respect for others' need for quiet. He could still escape, but he would do it more thoughtfully, considering the lives of those around him. Jack made a small, simple change. He bought a pair of high-quality headphones that allowed him to lose himself in the music without disturbing the world. For the first time in years, he played his favorite songs not through speakers, but through the quiet intimacy of his own mind. He could still feel the bass vibrating through his chest, still lose himself in the rhythms that made his heart race, but now it was his alone. He no longer drowned out the world. Instead, he began to listen to it more closely. As the days passed, something unexpected happened. Jack started to notice the other people in the building more. He saw the elderly couple in 3B who would sit on their balcony every evening, watching the sunset. He saw young Anna, a college student who was always hunched over her textbooks, looking stressed but determined. He even noticed the quiet man in 2D who worked late nights at a diner and always had a warm, tired smile when they crossed paths. Jack began to understand that life wasn't just about his own escape. It was about connection, about balance, about being present in the world while respecting the spaces of others. He started to wave at the people he'd ignored before, to smile and exchange a few words. And every now and then, when the neighborhood fell into a comfortable quiet, Jack would walk through the building with a new sense of awareness, noticing the subtle beauty in the world around him. He found a certain peace in the silence, something he had been too caught up to appreciate before. But life, as it always does, has a way of throwing curveballs. One late evening, just as Jack was sitting by his window, looking out at the city's lights, a shrill scream shattered the stillness of the night. He rushed out into the hallway, his heart racing. The building was eerily silent except for the distant hum of the storm. The scream came again, louder this time, desperate, pleading. Jack followed the sound, his pulse quickening, until he reached the apartment of the quiet man from 2D. He knocked frantically, but there was no answer. His gut told him something was wrong. Without thinking, he turned the handle and pushed the door open. The scene before him was a nightmare. The man from 2D lay sprawled on the floor, unconscious, with a pool of blood spreading beneath him. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed forward, checking for a pulse. It was then that he noticed the strange markings on the walls, symbols, drawn hastily in what looked like chalk. They seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, pulsing as if alive. Jack's mind raced. He had no explanation for what he was seeing, but something deep inside him felt a chill, an ancient warning that reverberated in his bones. The quiet man stirred, his eyes fluttering open, but instead of fear, his expression was one of calm resignation. "It's happening again," he whispered hoarsely. "The cycle, it never ends." Before Jack could ask him more, the man passed out once again, his body limp and unresponsive. Jack felt a rising sense of dread, but there was no time to dwell on it. He had to act. He rushed to the building's caretaker to call for help, but when he returned, the symbols on the walls were gone. Everything was normal again, as if it had never happened. The days that followed were strange. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the building, something that couldn't be explained by logic alone. He had seen the signs, felt the odd pulse of energy in the air, and the quiet man from 2D had disappeared without a trace. But the most unsettling part was the feeling that he was being watched, that the walls of the building held secrets far deeper than he could understand. Despite his unease, Jack continued to live in the building, but now he did so with a heightened awareness. He learned to be more present, to listen more closely, and to respect the quiet moments that others cherished. In his own way, Jack had learned the power of balance, the balance between music and silence, between solitude and connection, and between the visible world and the unseen forces that tugged at the edges of reality. As the weeks turned into months, Jack found peace in the small moments of everyday life, the quiet conversations in the hallways, the shared smiles, the warmth of a community that had unknowingly helped him discover something deeper. And though he still enjoyed his music, he had come to understand that it wasn't the loudest sound that mattered. It was the echo of the heart, the whispers of connection, the soft murmur of shared humanity that made the world truly resonate. And so, Jack's journey continued, not just through the rhythms of music, but through the mysterious, unpredictable rhythm of life itself. He had learned the value of silence, the strength found in listening, and the lessons hidden in the most unexpected of places. The story of his transformation had become one of understanding, growth, and a profound realization that the harmony of life lay in balancing the noise with the quiet, the chaos with the calm, and the self with the world. Through it all, Jack never forgot Mrs. Adler, whose simple wisdom had been the catalyst for his journey. He often saw her in the hallways, her frail figure moving slowly but with purpose, and he would smile at her, knowing that the greatest lessons often come from the most unlikely sources. And sometimes, when the night was still and the music faded into the background, Jack would sit by his window, gazing out at the city and listen, not just to the songs he loved, but to the world around him, the one he had come to understand and respect in ways he never had before.
Whispering echoes.